I still remember the feeling of being invisible. Every day at our family's company, I'd sit in meetings with my sister Ashley by my side, watching as our parents showered her with praise while barely glancing at the ideas I contributed. It wasn't that I didn't have ideas. Oh, believe me, I did. But somehow, in our parents' eyes, Ashley was always the one who shined. I'd present my proposals with careful thought, only to see them dismissed with a casual, "That's nice, Amanda," while they marveled over Ashley's suggestions as if they were groundbreaking revelations. Over time, the constant overshadowing began to eat away at me, fueling a growing frustration and a burning desire to be seen for who I truly was. Late one evening, when the office was nearly empty and the hum of computers and quiet chatter had faded to silence, I decided to stick around a little longer. I needed time to catch up on some financial reports, part of my routine, nothing out of the ordinary. But as I scrolled through the confidential emails and financial records on my computer, something caught my eye that made my heart drop. There, hidden among routine invoices and expense reports, were a series of suspicious transactions. My fingers trembled as I clicked through the details. The numbers didn't add up. Even more damning were the emails, cryptic messages exchanged between Ashley and someone I couldn't immediately identify. It was clear. Money was disappearing from the company's accounts, and all the evidence pointed to embezzlement. Shock and disbelief surged through me. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Every cell in my body screamed betrayal, not just by the company, but by my own sister. I sat there, frozen in place, as images of past meetings and hushed conversations replayed in my mind. I thought of all the times I'd tried to point out inconsistencies, only to be brushed aside. Now I knew the truth was staring me in the face. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. As I contemplated the next step, my mind raced with questions. How could Ashley do this? What if I confronted her? Could I really face the possibility that the sister I'd known all my life was capable of such treachery? Unable to shake the burning need for answers, I waited until later that night when the office was completely deserted. I found Ashley in her corner office, the soft glow of her computer screen illuminating her confident smile as she reviewed her emails. I knocked on her door, my heart pounding in my ears, and when she opened it, I didn't even try to hide the storm raging inside me. "Ashley, we need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. She raised an eyebrow and leaned against the doorframe, an amused smirk playing on her lips. "Oh, what's got you all worked up, little sister?" she asked casually, as if this were just another one of our many sibling squabbles. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "I know what you're doing," I said, holding up my phone so she could see the emails and records I'd uncovered. "Either you admit what you're doing, or I'm going to tell Mom and Dad everything." Her smile widened into a smirk of pure arrogance. "You really think they'll believe you over me?" she replied coolly. "You've always been the shadow, Amanda. They trust me because I know what I'm doing." Her words stung, each syllable a reminder of the years I'd spent struggling to be noticed. But I stood my ground, my heart aching with hurt yet fueled by a desperate resolve. "I'm not your shadow, Ashley," I said through gritted teeth. "I'm your sister, and I deserve to be treated like one. You need to come clean, or I promise you, I will." The confrontation ended as abruptly as it began. Ashley's laughter echoed in the empty office, cold and dismissive, while I left with a mixture of sorrow and determination churning inside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far worse. 2 days later, everything unraveled in a way I could never have imagined. I arrived at work to find police cars parked outside the company building, their lights flashing and sirens wailing. Confusion turned to horror as officers swarmed the entrance. I was quickly surrounded, my protests drowned out by the shouts of law enforcement. In a matter of minutes, I was handcuffed and led away, accused of embezzlement, the very crime I had uncovered. In the chaotic whirlwind of accusations and flashing cameras, I pleaded my innocence, screaming that it was Ashley who was behind it all. But our parents, already predisposed to trust Ashley's version of events, dismissed my protests as desperate lies. I watched, numb, as they shook their heads in disbelief, unable or unwilling to see the truth. It was the final betrayal, the ultimate dismissal of everything I had ever known about loyalty and family. The courtroom felt like a surreal nightmare, a stage where I was forced to perform my own public humiliation. I sat there, heart pounding in my chest as the judge read out the sentence. The gavel's final bang echoed in the room like a death knell. I couldn't believe I was here, accused of embezzlement, a crime I never committed. I remember the tearful protests of a few sympathetic onlookers, but even they couldn't change the crushing verdict. I looked out at the sea of indifferent faces, and worst of all, I saw my parents. Their expressions were a mixture of shock and disbelief. Yet when I tried to explain what I knew, they just shook their heads as if I were speaking gibberish. I felt more isolated than ever, betrayed not just by my sister, but by the people who were supposed to believe in me. I still recall the moment the courtroom doors closed behind me as I was led away in handcuffs. It all seemed so unreal. The cold metal biting into my wrists, the murmur of disapproving voices, and the unbearable silence from my parents. In that moment, I understood that the stigma of betrayal would follow me like a shadow, and that no one in that room was willing to see the truth. Prison wasn't what I imagined, but it was worse. The first few days were a blur of harsh lights, concrete walls, and the relentless hum of a life reduced to survival. My cell was small and barren, with a narrow window that only let in a sliver of gray daylight. The air was stale, and every sound, a dripping tap, distant voices, even my own echo, seemed to emphasize my isolation. I quickly learned that I was an easy target. Other inmates wasted no time in asserting their dominance, and I found myself the frequent victim of bullying. I remember one afternoon, as I was quietly reading in the corner of the common room, a group of older inmates surrounded me. They mocked me relentlessly, calling me names that made me shrink inside. I tried to ignore their cruelty, but their words cut deep. It was in those small, painful moments that I realized the world outside had abandoned me completely. In my downtime, I took solace in a tattered journal I'd managed to hold on to. Every night, I scribbled down the minutiae of my day, the sneers, the glares, the whispered insults. I'd write about the time a guard had thrown me a stony look for simply asking for extra water, or how a fellow inmate once snatched my pen right out of my hand just for the fun of it. It was in these fragments of bitter reality that I found a strange sort of clarity. I would often catch myself thinking, I won't be defined by this cell. I'm going to make her pay for every moment of this betrayal. Those words became my mantra, a secret vow hidden within the pages of my journal. Every so often, memories of the past would break through the haze of prison life. I'd recall the lively discussions at our family company, the moments when I'd pitched ideas with passion, only to have them dismissed in favor of Ashley's flashy presentations. I remembered the sense of pride I once felt when my designs had been acknowledged, even if only fleetingly, and how those moments had been stolen away by favoritism and deceit. Those recollections were bittersweet, a reminder of what I had lost and what I had been denied. In the quiet moments of the night as I lay in my cramped bunk, I'd close my eyes and see the vibrant colors of my old sketches and the supportive smiles of colleagues who believed in me, even if they were long gone now. But amidst the regret and despair, there was also a simmering resolve. With each passing day, my anger grew into a fierce determination. I began planning in my head, dreaming of the day I would escape this hellish place and expose Ashley for what she was, a manipulator who had betrayed her own sister for her own gain. I imagined the shock on everyone's faces when the truth came out, the vindication that would finally wash away the bitterness of my past. There were moments, however, when the weight of it all nearly broke me. During one particularly cold night, as I sat on the edge of my bunk with the journal open on my lap, I stared at the faded ink of my own words. I'm not just a number here, I whispered to myself. I am Amanda, and I will not be erased. In that moment, the cold concrete around me seemed to melt away, replaced by a small, steady flame of hope and defiance. In the midst of this desolation, I made a promise to myself, a vow born of pain and a desperate longing for justice. I whispered it into the darkness of my cell, so quietly that even the clamor of the prison couldn't drown it out. If I ever get out of here, I will expose Ashley's crimes. I will reclaim my life, my reputation, and everything she stole from me. That promise became a silent promise I carried in my heart, fueling every ounce of my resolve. The days in prison were long and relentless, but each one only strengthened that vow. I learned to hide my tears and mask my fear, replacing them with a burning determination that no prison cell could contain. Even when the cruelty of the other inmates and the cold indifference of the guards threatened to crush me, I held on to that promise. I clung to it like a lifeline, imagining the day I'd walk out of these walls, not as a broken woman, but as someone reborn, a woman who had taken back control of her destiny. So here I am, locked away in this cell, writing down my thoughts as a way to remind myself of who I am and what I'm fighting for. The betrayal, the arrest, the isolation, they are all pieces of a puzzle that I intend to solve. Every harsh word, every act of cruelty fuels my determination. I am Amanda, and I refuse to let this be the end of my story. I am going to make her pay. Every single moment of betrayal will be avenged. In the quiet solitude of this cell, as the night stretches on and the world outside moves on without me, I hold fast to that vow. I may be surrounded by concrete and despair, but my spirit is unbreakable. One day, I will walk free, and on that day, justice will finally be served. And until that day comes, I will remain here, keeping my promise alive on every page of this journal. I won't ever forget the day everything broke inside me. Every morning in that cell had become a relentless cycle of abuse and torment. The prison was a harsh, unforgiving world, where every moment was spent dodging the cruelty of those who had nothing better to do than remind me of my failures. I remember the days when the insults from the other inmates were little more than background noise, until they escalated into something far more brutal. One afternoon, when the tension in the block was particularly thick, a group of inmates cornered me in the corridor. I was huddled by my cell, trying to gather what little strength I had left, when they descended on me without warning. Their shouts and jeers reverberated off the concrete walls as they pummeled me, ignoring my desperate pleas. I felt every blow, not just on my battered body, but deep within my soul. I couldn't escape the agony. Each punch and kick was a reminder of the betrayal and isolation I'd suffered, compounded by the constant rejection from those I once trusted. I lay there on the cold floor, blood and tears mixing with the dust, my vision blurring as the pain took over. In that brutal moment, I felt as if every injustice I had endured was converging into one final crushing blow. The attack left me shattered, and in the hours that followed, my body gave out completely. I remember sinking into darkness, a profound sadness mingled with regret and a spark of defiance that refused to be snuffed out. My thoughts swirled with memories of better days at the family company. The fleeting moments of creativity and recognition before betrayal had robbed me of everything. I wondered if I'd ever see the light again. And then, amidst the haze of pain and sorrow, I slipped away into unconsciousness, my body succumbing to the injuries and exhaustion that had become my curse. I awoke. Or rather, I didn't. In the final moments, I felt an overwhelming sense of regret for all that I had lost, the words of my vows echoing in my mind. I would expose Ashley and reclaim my life. My last thought was a fervent hope that someday, somehow, justice would prevail. And then, everything went black. But as I drifted in that endless darkness, something impossible began to happen. I felt a peculiar warmth, a gentle pull that grew stronger until, with a jolt that shook me to my very core, I awoke. At first, I couldn't tell what was different. The sensations were the same, a lingering ache, the soft hum of distant voices. But then, as I opened my eyes, I realized I was somewhere familiar, yet startlingly different. The sterile, oppressive walls of the prison were gone. Instead, I found myself in the small, sunlit room of my old apartment. Confusion surged through me as I tried to piece together the shards of my memory. What? What is happening? I muttered to myself, my voice trembling between disbelief and a dawning hope. I sat up slowly, the faint memories of pain and darkness still clinging to me like cobwebs. As the room came into focus, I noticed the calendar on the wall, 3 years earlier than the day of my arrest. It was impossible. I had somehow been given a second chance, a chance to rewrite everything before the betrayal and the tragic events that had shattered my life. My mind raced as I tried to process this miraculous turn of events. I wandered around the apartment, touching familiar objects, the coffee mug my mother once gave me, the stack of notebooks on the desk, and each touch sparked a mix of joy and sorrow. I was back in time, before everything went horribly wrong. The embezzlement scandal, the frame-up, the arrest, the brutal beating, and even my death. All of it was still ahead of me. This wasn't just a dream or a hallucination. It was a real, tangible second chance. I sank onto the edge of my bed, my heart pounding in a rhythm that felt both alien and profoundly my own. This isn't just a second chance, I whispered, a fierce determination rising within me. It's my chance to reclaim everything that was stolen from me. I could almost see a vision of my former self, a younger, unbroken version of Amanda, smiling back at me from the mirror, full of potential and hope. In that quiet, transformative moment, I made a decision. I would use the knowledge of the future as my weapon. I would expose every lie, every deceit, and prevent the betrayal that had led to my downfall. I resolved to confront my sister Ashley, to stop her before she could orchestrate the frame-up and ruin my life. I would gather evidence, reclaim my ideas, and take control of my destiny once and for all. The world might still be waiting to repeat its mistakes, but I would be the one to rewrite the script. As I sat there, the sunlight warming my face and the room alive with possibility, I could feel a shift inside me, a rebirth, not just of my body, but of my spirit. I was no longer the broken, defeated Amanda trapped in a prison of betrayal and despair. I was a woman reborn, armed with foreknowledge and a burning desire to make things right. The agony of my past, the brutality I had endured, would no longer define me. Instead, it would be the fuel that propelled me forward into a future of my own making. With the new light of dawn streaming through the window, I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in years. I was ready to face the future head-on, to use this miraculous rebirth to alter the course of my life. Every moment of suffering, every ounce of betrayal had led me to this defining point. Now I would harness the power of my second chance to rewrite history and ensure that the judgment Ashley deserved would be met without my own life being destroyed. I took a deep breath, the air feeling crisp and full of promise, and prepared to step out into a world where I held the power to change everything. The rebirth was real, and with it came a fierce, unyielding resolve. I was ready to reclaim my life, my identity, and everything that had been wronged. Waking up in the past felt like stepping into a surreal version of my old life, a life I'd once thought was irrevocably ruined. As I walked through the familiar corridors of the family company, every detail hit me with a strange mix of nostalgia and bitter clarity. I'd re-entered the office with a fresh perspective that came from knowing the future. It wasn't long before I noticed the same subtle favoritism that had haunted me for years. My parents still showered Ashley with praise, dismissing my ideas like background noise. It was almost comical how little had changed. Yet everything was different now that I carried the weight of foreknowledge. Now, sitting in a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and corporate ambition, I reflected on all the times I'd tried to assert myself. Times when my suggestions were met with polite nods before being completely ignored. Now, with this new lease on life, I saw it all with fresh eyes. I remembered the frustration, the isolation, and the creeping sense of betrayal that had defined those years. But I also remembered the sting of injustice, which now fueled a fierce resolve in me. I took a deep breath, letting the familiar surroundings wash over me, while my mind raced with everything I knew was coming. I thought, this is my chance to rewrite history. I've been given a precious window of opportunity to fix everything before the seeds of betrayal take root. The past wasn't set in stone yet. It was malleable, waiting for someone to shape it. And I intended to be that someone. In the weeks that followed, I began gathering memories and insights from the future. Every conversation, every little detail of how my parents interacted with Ashley and me was recorded meticulously in my mind. I took note of the subtle nuances, a raised eyebrow here, a dismissive comment there, details that, when combined with what I already knew, would help me construct a strategy. My mind became a vault of secrets, storing every piece of knowledge like a treasure map that would guide my next moves. I'd sit quietly in my office during breaks, scribbling down thoughts and forming plans. It was all very methodical, almost clinical, and yet it filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. One afternoon, while revisiting an old project file that had once been ignored, I felt a spark of inspiration. I realized that the work I had once poured my heart into was still there, waiting to be recognized on my own terms. I opened the file, running my fingers over the faded sketches and scribbled notes, and I knew then that I wasn't just reclaiming my ideas. I was reclaiming my identity. Every line, every curve, represented a piece of me that had been stolen and left unacknowledged for too long. I made a quiet promise to myself right then. I would protect my work and my reputation, using this precious foreknowledge to build a new plan, one that would finally expose the truth. Planning my new strategy felt almost therapeutic. I spent countless evenings alone in my study, surrounded by the remnants of my past achievements and the tools of my trade. I created a detailed timeline of events, cross-referencing every piece of evidence I had from the future with the current state of the company. I even began to draft an internal report, a document that, once perfected, would serve as the cornerstone of my case against Ashley. Every word I wrote was laced with the determination of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. I often found myself talking out loud to my empty room, the conversation a mix of casual banter and serious planning. "I won't let history repeat itself," I would say, staring at the blank page before me. "I'm going to make sure my truth is known. No more hiding in the shadows. It's time to step into the light and claim what should have always been mine." Those words, spoken softly but with fierce conviction, became my mantra, a constant reminder of why I was fighting and what was at stake. I knew that exposing Ashley's wrongdoings would not be easy. It meant dismantling the carefully constructed facade that had allowed her to not only take credit for my work, but also to frame me for the very crimes that now threatened to define my existence. I would need to be smart, precise, and utterly ruthless in my pursuit of justice. But I also knew that I had a secret weapon now, the knowledge of the future. With this advantage, I could anticipate their moves, safeguard my own interests, and ensure that every step I took was calculated and deliberate. My internal monologue was a constant companion as I mapped out my plan. If I can expose every lie, every forged document, every bit of deceit, then maybe, just maybe, people will finally see the real me, I thought during one long, sleepless night. I'll show them that I'm not the victim they've always thought I was, but the one who was wronged and is now ready to fight back. In the quiet hours of the night, with the city lights flickering outside my window, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. I wasn't just planning a comeback, I was planning a revolution, a complete overthrow of the status quo that had left me in the shadows for so long. I was going to expose Ashley before her wrongdoings could escalate further, before the company and our family became irreparably tainted by her actions. I gathered all my notes, lined them up like a strategic blueprint, and looked at them one by one. The plan was ambitious, but it was necessary. Every piece of evidence, every carefully noted observation from the past, was a stepping stone to the moment when I would reclaim my life. I was determined to make sure that no one, least of all my parents, would ever doubt my worth again. As I closed my notebook that night, a final thought echoed in my mind. I will not let the past define me. I have the power to change the future, and I'm going to use it to make sure that my truth is known. With that, I set my jaw and prepared for the next phase of my plan. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally in control of my destiny. I knew if I was going to turn the tables, I needed solid evidence, and fast. After that fateful confrontation and my subsequent arrest, I couldn't just sit back and let the lies continue to define me. I started by secretly gathering every shred of proof I could find of Ashley's embezzlement. The financial records, the confidential emails, and even those incriminating memos that had always been tucked away in the dark corners of our shared office. I spent countless late nights combing through digital archives and dusty filing cabinets at the company, all while making discreet calls to old contacts who still had a bit of trust in me. With the foresight of knowing exactly what was coming, I secured every document that would later serve as the cornerstone of my case. Every time I found a new piece of evidence, I felt a small surge of vindication. It was like reclaiming a piece of my stolen identity. I saved digital copies on a secure drive and hid physical copies in a safety deposit box at a small bank I'd used in the past. I also reached out to an ex-accountant who once respected my analytical mind. In hushed tones over encrypted calls, she confirmed that the numbers I'd been poring over were as damning as they looked. "Amanda, you've got everything you need here," she assured me. "If you can get this into the right hands, it'll blow the whole thing wide open." I couldn't help but smile at her words, a spark of hope lighting up my dark world. But evidence was only part of the plan. I needed a network, a team of trusted allies who could help me bring Ashley's crimes into the light and, more importantly, help me build a future of my own. I started reaching out to former colleagues and contacts who had always admired my work before everything went sour. I made a series of secret phone calls in the dead of night, inviting them to meet at quiet cafes where we wouldn't be overheard. In one such dimly lit corner of a local coffee shop, I met with Marcus, a former project manager who'd always believed in my creative ideas. Over steaming cups of coffee, I laid out my plan. Marcus, I'm not asking for a favor. I'm asking for a revolution, I told him, my voice low and determined. I've got proof. I've got a network of people who know what I'm capable of, and I'm ready to expose everything. Are you in? Marcus leaned in, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Count me in, Amanda. You've always been the real talent, and it's time the world saw that. In similar hushed meetings, I connected with others. Jenna, a savvy legal advisor, Raj, a tech genius who could help secure our communications, and even a couple of old friends from the industry who were tired of the same old corruption. With every conversation, I felt my network growing stronger, the bonds of loyalty weaving together into a safety net that I could rely on. Simultaneously, I began the painful process of forging a new identity for myself, a complete departure from the toxic legacy of our family company. I started by quietly severing ties with the old systems. I canceled subscriptions, deactivated old email addresses, and began crafting a new story. I wanted to be known not as Amanda, the betrayed daughter, but as someone who had risen from the ashes, a self-made entrepreneur with a vision all her own. I spent hours online, researching branding, building a new digital persona that would be authentic and untraceable, and even taking classes in business management to sharpen my skills. Late at night, when the city was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, I'd often whisper to myself, I'm not just going to fix this, I'm going to build something that's truly mine. That phrase became my mantra, a promise that every setback would be transformed into the stepping stone for my future success. I even started working on a new logo, something that combined elements of rebirth. A phoenix rising from the ashes, perhaps, or a simple yet powerful symbol that represented new beginnings. Every design I created for this new identity was a rebellion against the old narrative that had defined my life for so long. I'd look at my sketches and feel a rush of determination. I was in control now, and nothing, especially not the shadow of my sister's treachery, could hold me back. With the evidence meticulously gathered and my network coming together, I began setting the stage for the grand reversal. I outlined my plan in a series of detailed documents. First, expose Ashley's embezzlement publicly. Then, use that momentum to dismantle the corrupt practices that had plagued the family company. And finally, launch my own business that would stand as a testament to my creativity and resilience. Every detail was scrutinized, every contingency planned out. I spent days refining the timeline, cross-referencing every piece of evidence, and drafting press releases that would be the catalyst for my public reveal. Sitting in my small apartment, surrounded by stacks of documents and notebooks filled with my scribbled plans, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. The path was clear: expose the truth, reclaim my legacy, and build a future that was entirely my own. I knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but every moment I had spent in that cell, every ounce of betrayal and pain, had prepared me for this. As I closed my notebook that night, I took one last look at everything I'd meticulously prepared. The evidence, the contacts, the plans for a new identity. All of it was a promise to myself that I would no longer be defined by the past. I looked at the calendar, marked with the dates and deadlines that would soon set the plan in motion, and I smiled to myself. Tomorrow, I begin to turn the tables. I whispered into the quiet of my apartment, my voice steady and resolute. That simple declaration was the spark I needed, a beacon of determination that illuminated the darkness of my past and set me on the path to reclaim everything that had been stolen from me. I knew that the next steps would require every bit of courage and cunning I possessed, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to embrace my future. My life was about to change, and I was going to make sure that my truth would be known, no matter what it took. The day had finally come. I stood in the center of a crowded conference room in our family company's headquarters. my heart pounding as I prepared to reveal the evidence that would change everything. Reporters, company officials, and even a few family members had gathered, their eyes a mix of curiosity and skepticism. I took a deep breath, remembering every sleepless night, every whispered betrayal that had led me here. This wasn't just about proving my innocence, it was about exposing the betrayal that had defined my life for far too long. I stepped up to the podium, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice clear and unwavering. "Today I stand before you to reveal a truth that has been hidden in plain sight, a truth that has cost me everything." I paused as murmurs rippled through the room. I clicked a button on my remote, and the screen behind me lit up with digital copies of financial records, emails, and documents that proved, indisputably, that Ashley had been embezzling money from our company. The room fell silent as I walked through the evidence, each slide a bullet point in the long list of her deceit. I could see shock and disbelief ripple through the audience. Even my parents' faces, once so sure and unyielding in their favoritism, now betrayed confusion and hurt. I felt the weight of every stolen sketch, every dismissed idea, and every ounce of my suppressed talent come flooding back. When the presentation ended, I took a step back, allowing the silence to speak for itself. That's when the confrontation happened. Ashley, who had been sitting near the back, stormed to the front. Her eyes burned with indignation as she grabbed the microphone from the podium. "This isn't just a mistake. It's a betrayal that has cost me everything," I said, my voice echoing in the now tense room. Ashley's response was immediate and defensive. "You're lying. You're trying to ruin me," she shouted, her tone sharp and accusing. The clash of our voices filled the room with raw, unfiltered emotion. I looked her straight in the eyes, letting the truth shine through every word. "I'm not lying, Ashley," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of betrayal and hurt. "What you did wasn't a mistake. It was calculated. It was deliberate, and it has destroyed lives." For a long moment, time seemed to stand still as we faced each other, the truth hanging heavily in the air. The tension was palpable. In that moment, I felt the weight of every injustice I'd suffered, every creative idea that had been snatched from me, every moment of neglect that had defined my existence. And now, finally, the truth was out. The fallout was immediate. Gasps and whispers spread among the crowd. Some of the company officials exchanged shocked glances, and even my parents, who had always defended Ashley unconditionally, looked shaken. I heard one of them murmur, "How could this be?" The room buzzed with a mix of anger and disbelief. I could feel the eyes of the audience on me, some filled with admiration for my courage, others with pity for the betrayal that had been uncovered. Internally, I couldn't help but think, every stolen sketch, every dismissed idea, now feels like a ghost haunting our family's legacy. Those ghosts, once silent and ignored, now roared in the face of our hypocrisy. The revelation was cathartic. It was as if years of accumulated hurt and frustration were finally being washed away by a torrent of truth. As the media began to swarm, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward, I felt an odd sense of liberation. The tide was turning. Public judgment was shifting. People who had once dismissed me now saw the full extent of the betrayal. The evidence was undeniable, and the balance of power had shifted irrevocably in my favor. In that chaos, I realized that I had reclaimed something far more important than my reputation. I had reclaimed my power. I stepped away from the podium as reporters began asking questions, and company officials scrambled to explain away the inconsistencies. My parents whispered among themselves, their expressions a mix of regret and disbelief. And there, amidst the storm of flashing lights and heated voices, I could see the tide of public opinion slowly turning against Ashley. She was no longer the untouchable golden child. The truth had set her exposed for all to see. Yet even as I felt a surge of vindication, there was an undercurrent of painful cost. The price I'd paid for this revelation was steep. A fractured family, years of isolation, and a part of me that would never be the same. But as I stood there, watching the fallout unfold, I knew that the pain was necessary. It was the crucible through which I had been reborn. I listened as one reporter asked, "Amanda, what comes next for you after today's revelations?" I paused, letting the weight of the question settle, and then replied in a measured, casual tone, "This isn't just about exposing the past, it's about reclaiming my future. I'm done being defined by betrayal. Today I've taken a stand, and I intend to keep taking one no matter what it takes." As the press conference wound down and the crowd began to disperse, I felt the lingering shock in the air, a palpable reminder that some wounds take time to heal. But I also felt hope. Hope that finally my truth would be known and that I could start to rebuild what had been taken from me. The revelation of Ashley's crimes had turned the tide. The judgment that she now faced was inevitable, and with every passing moment, I could feel the power shifting further away from her. I had exposed the darkest parts of our family's legacy, and in doing so, I had paved the way for a new beginning, one where I would no longer be the forgotten, betrayed sister. As I left the building that day, the cool air felt like a breath of fresh freedom. I knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and the painful aftermath of long-held deceptions. But for the first time in years, I felt in control, empowered by the truth, and ready to reclaim my destiny. The echoes of the confrontation, the flashes of cameras, and the murmurs of shock would forever remind me of this pivotal moment. It was a day of reckoning, a day when the scales of justice began to tip in my favor, and even as I walked away from the chaos, I carried with me the unshakable knowledge that I had finally turned the tables. This was not just a public reveal, it was the beginning of my long-awaited redemption. And while the painful cost of betrayal would always linger in my heart, I knew that with every step forward, I was reclaiming the life and legacy that was rightfully mine. As I remember the day I finally decided to cut ties with the past. It was a bittersweet moment that marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The family company, once the center of my world, had become a mausoleum of favoritism and deceit. I stood in the foyer of that imposing building, the cool marble under my feet feeling like the last remnants of a life that had never truly belonged to me. My parents' voices echoed in my mind, so full of praise for Ashley, so dismissive of everything I had to offer. In that moment, I knew I couldn't keep playing a role in a legacy built on lies. I walked out of that building without looking back, each step a symbolic severance from a past that had long suffocated my true self. The decision wasn't easy. I'd spent years trying to prove my worth within those walls, only to have every achievement stolen away and every idea dismissed. But as I walked down the street, the weight of the betrayal slowly lifted from my shoulders. I whispered to myself, "I'm done with that. It's time to start over." The cool afternoon breeze seemed to affirm my resolve, carrying away the stale air of that toxic legacy. I felt a surge of liberation as I stepped into a future that I would build entirely on my own terms. With the evidence of Ashley's embezzlement still clutched in my memory, and on encrypted drives safely hidden, I turned my attention to the future. I knew I wasn't going to let the past define me. Instead, I was going to channel every ounce of that pain and betrayal into something powerful. I began salvaging every bit of financial windfall I could muster from the scraps left behind by the scandal. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to spark a new beginning. I found a small, modest office space in a rundown part of town. Nothing flashy, but it had potential. The space was bare, with peeling paint and a few old desks that had seen better days. To me, it was the perfect blank canvas. I spent the first few weeks painting, rearranging, and slowly transforming that shabby space into my new headquarters. Every stroke of the brush, every new piece of furniture I brought in, felt like a declaration of independence. "This isn't just a business," I'd say to myself, scribbling it down in my notebook during those late nights of planning. "It's my declaration of independence." As I settled into my new office, I started reaching out to the people who had always believed in me before everything went awry. I reconnected with former colleagues, industry contacts, and even a few sympathetic family members who had quietly doubted the narrative that had been fed to them. I attended networking events where I slowly began to rebuild my reputation, this time as a self-made entrepreneur with a fresh vision for the future. I remember one small event at a local cafe where, over cups of steaming coffee and modest pastries, I found myself surrounded by people eager to hear my story. Their eyes lit up with shared hope and a mutual understanding that sometimes the most painful betrayals can lead to the greatest transformations. I also held several brainstorming sessions in my cramped office. I'd sit around a rickety table with a handful of trusted allies, jotting down ideas, sketching plans, and discussing everything from innovative product designs to strategies for marketing my new venture. The conversations were casual, filled with laughter and the occasional expletive when ideas hit dead ends. Every small victory, a successful pitch to a potential client, a glowing email from a former mentor, was celebrated like a personal triumph. I felt a sense of belonging again, a community of like-minded individuals who were all in it for the promise of a fresh start. Through these moments of collaboration and shared hope, my new business began to take shape. I worked tirelessly, often late into the night, fueled by a cocktail of determination and the desire to prove that I was more than the betrayal I'd endured. The scars of the past were still there, etched deep within me, but I now saw them as symbols of my resilience. They reminded me of how far I'd come, of every obstacle I'd overcome, and of the strength that had carried me through the darkest times. Slowly but surely, my venture started to gain recognition. Small contracts came in, and word began to spread that a new innovative company was emerging from the ashes of the old. I started receiving emails from industry insiders, offering support and even opportunities to collaborate. Each message was a small validation, a confirmation that I was finally carving out a space where my voice, my creativity, and my hard work were truly acknowledged. I couldn't help but smile every time I read those emails. They were like little bursts of sunlight on an otherwise stormy day. I spent a lot of time reflecting on my journey. There were moments when I'd sit in my office late at night, staring out the window at the city lights and think back on everything that had happened. The betrayal by Ashley, the painful years in prison, the brutal reality of being framed, all of it had led to this moment. And as I looked around at the modest space that was now mine, I realized that I had risen from the ashes. I wasn't the broken Amanda who had been left behind. I was a woman reborn, a force in my own right, ready to redefine my future. In those quiet moments of introspection, I'd write in my journal about the journey, from the fall to this new beginning. I scribbled down thoughts like, every scar tells a story, and mine is a story of survival and triumph. I reminded myself that I was in control now, that my past no longer had the power to dictate my future. I was building something that was truly mine, free from the bias and deceit that had once plagued my life. And so, with each new day, my resolve only grew stronger. I wasn't just building a business, I was reclaiming my identity, my creativity, and my destiny. Every meeting, every brainstorming session, every small victory was a step toward a future that I was determined to shape with my own hands. As I sat back in my new office one evening, exhausted but filled with a sense of purpose, I looked at the wall where I had hung a poster of a phoenix rising from the ashes. It was a constant reminder of my own transformation. I took a deep breath and smiled to myself. I've risen from the ashes, I whispered softly, and now it's time for the world to see who I truly am. That night, I closed my journal with a definitive note that summed up everything I'd been striving for. This is not just the start of a business, it's the beginning of my new life. And with that, I turned off the lights, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, knowing that my destiny was finally in my own hands.